Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Loki Episode 2. So, immediately when I'm looking into IMDb today compared to a week ago, IMDb had nothing. IMDb had no descriptions of one character in this show because it was early. Now that I am to see IMDb with actually a full scale of descriptions of people, now I can go in here and say things correctly. Now I can go in here and actually be able to just say, oh, okay, so instead of this being called this, I know fully fledgling now that it should have been called that this whole entire time because I was looking for a cool name, but instead have to settle with a boring name that just. Like last week, I kept calling the TVA, I kept calling them Minuteman because that name seemed cool, and that name seemed like, yeah, like, if anything, the TVA should be called Minuteman because that name sounds really, really cool. But it was incorrect. So, we have the time variant authorities that are to be called what I had said was Minuteman the week before. Luckily, there was no Minuteman to show up in last week's episode for me to just be like, like, hey, why is he naming all these people off as Minuteman? It was just a temporary name. Because really, I more than likely naturally assumed that there would be no interest in these reviews. Because it's pretty normal for me to maybe get a 1 or 2 or whatever kind of view off of this one, sadly, compared to what I would get for Superman and Lois or some other thing. So, really, I did not much put like a huge amount of thought into these reviews because I knew how they were going to turn out, sadly enough, but who knows, maybe that'll turn around. So we have the TVA here, and pretty much this episode, or just this show, is going exactly how I thought it would be. This show is lazy, and this show is just kind of like, oh, like, I kind of, like, even when there is surprises, it's expected surprises. Really, we have a villain in this episode that is honestly non-existent. You could say, well, no. Like, he's actually in this episode more so than he was in previous. The villain is still non-existent. The villain is just a surprising thing that, again, did not surprise me. And really, when watching a game or playing a game like Marvel Future Fight and seeing the skins of Loki, I immediately was just like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if they went this route? Wouldn't it be interesting if they did this? And then eventually going into this episode, I was like, oh, okay, so they went with an oddball like Loki. Okay, like they kind of showcase in the early part of this episode the many different variations of Loki that they might bump into. And so, really, when you are to finally see Loki at the end of this episode, you, I guess, will be surprised, but really, I was like, well, how we are starting to get a little bit more of Mobius's kind of like information of Mobius and how he sees the world is, I guess, good, but it's not exactly something that I deemed to be interesting. I had tried to watch this episode twice, and twice I had fallen asleep while watching this episode. So I had to finally come in here fully awake and watch this episode so that way I could just say, okay, now I have the full entire information of this episode for me to review it because I could not stay awake and try to watch this episode. It's impossible because really this episode is really just like put it on and have it be background noise because nothing is important in this episode. Really, we have Loki that in a part of this episode is to tell us how exactly important this show is right now. Nothing matters. Nothing at all matters. None of this matters. Hey, look at me. That's basically straight up what this show is I'm assuming at the very end of all this, nothing matters. So this show honestly is going to be a stalling of time to get more Disney Plus content out there. Sadly enough. But really this show makes Tom honestly look lazy. It makes the show just kind of look and seem like, yeah, this just seems lazy. This, like, if anything before, like, I could say that in the pilot episode, at least this show had money in the pilot episode. But once we got to the second episode, that budget just went out the window. Like, this feels so cheap and so, like, God, like, I don't feel like this episode, like, this episode is skippable. Funny enough, like, go and get the spoilers, go and get the Easter eggs, but anything beyond that is non-existent. It's not important. So let's go out of our way to review this then, to get it out of the way. So I think it is that coveted time for me to go out of my way to say it is spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this episode. So, in the very beginning of this episode, we are to have this time jumping around thing that is supposed to look cool. And to me, it just looks like, man, this show is just a jumbled mess. And we really just have it be that they are trying to come up with some kind of way to make this show look visually interesting just by setting. We have a Renaissance fair going on in 1985. And so Loki is to arrive at this time variant location, and these hunters are arrived to try and retrieve this variant, the TVA. So these TVA are to go into this tent to try to retrieve Loki. And they're looking around, trying to figure out where Loki is, and I'm immediately like, God, is this like the old-fashioned like Scooby-Doo scenario where these people are so dumb that like they're going to be chasing after like Loki, like opening and closing doors from one hallway, and like they're going to be doing the Scooby-Doo doorway trick where you consistently have Loki coming from one door to the other, to the other, to the other, with the TVA chasing after him and opening that same door to figure out where he is. Like, that feels to be, like, the stupidity of the TVA in this scenario. But, so, we have to basically prevent you from seeing Loki at all through most of this episode to eventually get the aha moment at the end. But again, it was not a aha for me. It wasn't. That's what happens when you know too much about a character to just kind of see like, oh, so they're going that route. Sure, great. It was Agatha all along. It was. It was Agatha. That's she's in this show. No, it's not. Don't even try to like think that. No, Agatha's not in this show. What are you talking about? No, like it's basically the Agatha is all along kind of story in this episode. So the hunters are to try and find Loki. Loki is to touch one of these hunters and become them. And then this hunter, who is Hunter, uh, oh my god, Hunter something. It doesn't matter because all these people don't matter to me. Hunter C20. So this hunter is to go and attack every single one of her other hunters and take them out. And I am like lazy writing so that way we can get an action sequence. So the TVA is with Mobius and Loki are to go on to this same Wisconsin Renaissance Fair to eventually see what had happened to their men. And there is actually some hesitation of wanting Loki to come with them to anywhere. We have Mobius who has to justify it to his superior that there's a reason for why Loki is coming with them. So Loki and Mobius are to go to this Renaissance Fair, and it's kind of funny how the Renaissance Fair people are looking at these TVAs and they're like, you're kind of out of place there, buddy. Like, if anything, we really want people to like look like the right timeline for this Renaissance Fair. So the TVA with Loki and Mobius go into this tent to see what had happened. Loki was to go and steal one of their research gadgets to try and be able to help him with a project somewhere down the road later in this episode. So Mobius is to tell Loki and ask him, like, hey, like, what do you think Loki would do in this scenario? Loki is to mention to Mobius and the TVA that do not go back outside. Do not leave this this tent because you'll regret it. And Mobius is like, well, why? And so Loki has to go on this huge schlick of Loki mentioning how that Loki is waiting on the TVA outside because that's what Loki would do. Loki is saying that they are going to be somehow tricked or trapped or attacked when they are to get out of this location, and because that's what Loki would do. That's the mischievous thing that Loki is to do with these people. So Mobius is like, well, if anything, like, I think we're going to go and take our chances and see what happens when we get out of here. So, like, because Loki needs to, like, seem that he himself is really very smart and that he has some viable information that is going to make him seem or sound important, which it won't. Mobius goes out of the tent and nothing is to happen, and so immediately they're like, well, like, I guess you were wrong. Like, I guess, Loki, you were wrong. So they get back, and really Loki is apologizing for his missteps, uh, and so Mobius is to eventually talk to his superior, and his superior is asking Mobius, it's like, why are you bringing Loki to every single one of these cases? Like, it makes no sense for you to have him there. Why are you having him there? Mobius decides, well, the reason why I'm having Loki here is because I am learning as we go along who Loki is, and I'm realizing that Loki likes to stall for time. So that's what I can take from this new Loki is the other Loki will also like to stall for time. So that's the thing that we can figure out via the following episodes. So Mobius is to also tell us that there is a bunch of trinkets that his superior has that are actually his, that he should have actually kept, and have all these like weird little like trinkets on his desk collecting dust. So his superior is like, well, I sent you guys on all these missions, so I should actually keep all the stuff. So Mobius is like, whatever. So Mobius pushes Loki to go and do some research. Uh, Mobius tells Loki, hey, like, go through a lot of these case files and, like, see what kind of sticks out. Like, see where, like, you can make some kind of assumption of what you yourself would do in this case scenario. So, Loki is to first see the events of Thor Ragnarok. So, Loki is to read about this and to read about how many numerous Asgardians had died, and like the event of Thor Ragnarok. And Loki is like, well, that's fine and great and all, but I want to see like how much stuff that I can actually read from the TVA. So Loki goes to this desk clerk and is to ask her, like, hey, like, what are any of the records that I can actually read? Because Loki starts asking for things, and this woman is like to mention, like, well, that's classified. That's classified. I'm sorry, you can't read any of that. So Loki says, well, what is the thing that I can read? So this woman is to give Loki this file, and Loki is to read it. And so Loki makes the assumption that his doppelganger is to be located in disaster events where there could be no recorded history of anything going on because no one would see the point. Because if a world like Asgard is to be completely wiped out by Thor Ragnarok, that's where Loki can hide out into, because no one would dare record anything of anybody doing anything in that location, because the location is going to not exist after a brief amount of time anyways. So, because Loki is to help Mobius understand why he's coming with this decision. So, Loki takes Mobius's bowl of food away from him and drops it in front of him, and Loki goes and grabs a thing of salt and pepper, and Loki also goes and grabs a can from a guy. So Loki makes this layman terms understanding to people that, so Loki is going and taking this food and saying that if Loki were to go into, say, Thor Ragnarok and knock off Hulk off the Rainbow Bridge, and so that event would be symbolized as Loki pouring salt and pepper into this guy's bowl. Then Loki is to mention nobody cares about what Loki is going to do with that Thor Ragnarok moment because no one is going to record the devastation of Asgard because no one will care. So Loki is to say that no matter how much salt and pepper that you're going to pour into this bowl, you're going to take this pop or this liquid and pour it also into this bowl and ruin how much ever salt and pepper that you have put into this food, because now all you're going to taste is this pop or this liquid, and not the salt and pepper. The salt and pepper are now ruined. They're a non-existing factor. So Mobius is like, oh my god. So because of like the annihilation of a location, people could do whatever they want. Like they go to Italy and they try to experiment on this to test this theory. So both Loki and Mobius go to Italy, where there is a volcano that is going to briefly erupt. So they're testing this theory. So Mobius tells Loki, well, hey, like, if we're gonna come here, like, let's try and make slight mishaps. Let's try and, like, could you make a bird call, Loki? And Loki is like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm not gonna just make some bird calls. So Loki sees a spot where there are goats being caged in, and Loki goes over and unlatches this goat pin or goat caged area to let these goats free. Loki mentions like, hey, my goat brethren, I will set you free. Loki mentions how he is a part of the time variant authorities, and Loki is telling everybody in their native tongue that a volcano is going to erupt on this environment, and because he is from the future, he is from the time variant association or the time variant authorities, and so they are all going to die soon. So Loki tells these people all of this. Loki makes it back to Mobius, and Mobius realizes that, oh my god, like, there is no blip on the this information telling me that there was anything recorded. There was no time anomaly that happened here that created some branch that was to change a thing in the future. So Loki mentions to Mobius, it's like, well, if I were to be me, this is exactly where I would be in this timeline. So we start to see the volcano erupt and head towards the town. So Loki and Mobius go back to their offices. So now we have the arduous task of having both Loki and Mobius trying to figure out what disastrous event that Loki would be hiding into, because there is way too many. So here's the goofy Friday the 13th part 5 thing that goes into this episode. So Loki was to, or Loki, Mobius was to, luckily enough, go into a time period in the pilot episode, and he was to notice a candy that was there that Mobius uh, sent through the system, and nobody could come up with anything. So Mobius goes and takes the candy that he was to retrieve and realize that this candy is only important during a certain time period, and assesses or assumes that it must have been Loki's candy bar because this candy bar was not in that time. So they had to narrow down exactly what time period that Loki was in with this candy bar. So evidently this was from a certain time gap. So they narrow it down uh, that there was a disaster event that happened in the year of 2050. And so they are to uh, go to this supermarket that is going to be hit with this horrible storm that looks almost like typhoonish, because this convenience store is seemingly surrounded with water, and like they are going and trying to look for Loki in this convenience store. But let's put a pin in that because there are also things going on in this episode that is kind of dialogue stuff. So Loki and Mobius, when they are kind of talking together, having a dialogue together, Loki is to notice that it seems that Mobius tends to consistently have magazines and information about a jet ski. So Loki's like, why Mobius are you doing so much research about a jet ski? Like, are you going to use it in a future time variant uh like thing? And Mobius is like, well, no. What I've realized is that really, out of all the inventions that we have ever had, that the jet ski is like a fun item uh, that is just the one kind of thing, the one true uh, like thing for Mobius that like has always stayed consistent throughout the years. Evidently, there is no consistent improvements on a jet ski because it's just always going to look the exact same way. So, and plus, a jet ski is probably the most fun activity for anyone to do. So that's why Mobius is trying as much as humanly possible to know information so much more so about a jet ski, because I'm assuming in one of these episodes a jet ski is going to become important somewhere in these episodes. Like, I'm assuming it's probably going to be like the Happy Days ending where like where Mobius is going to ride a jet ski and like jump over a shark or something at the like at the end of this show or something. Eventually Mobius is probably going to get on a jet ski at some point, and I'm assessing it's probably either going to be sometime soon or whatever. So anyways, so we have the jet ski dialogue out. I paraphrased everything, but it's a lot of this dialogue is hook. Anyways, so push on to the convenience store, which I think is called like Commart or like something with that kind of name. It'll be interesting if they are to, like, I think it would be cool if they went into 2099 if in this show, and if they don't, I will be upset. Because like 2099 is actually a very important timeline that has showcased a number of characters. Like we have Spider-Man 2099, we have Ghost Rider 2099, Punisher 2099, and all kinds of interesting characters through the timeline of 2099. If we're going to go and do 2050, we can do 2099. So hopefully we do it. Because I desperately want to see, like, if we're going to have real, true fun with this, we need to do 2099. We won't do Spider-Man 2099 because that's a thing that we can't do because this is Marvel and Sony owns the rights for Spider-Man 2099. If this was an animated thing, then that would be different. But we can't do a live-action Spider-Man 2099 in a Marvel thing. I don't think that can happen, but maybe we can do a Ghost Rider 2099 or a Punisher 2099 or any other 2099 character that actually isn't Spider-Man. So, and that would be awesome, but we won't do that either. It won't happen. So, we won't do a guest appearance from some 2099 character. It won't happen, sadly. It would be cool, but it won't happen. So, Loki, we go into this 2050 timeline at some convenience store. So, Loki and the TVA make their way to this convenience store, and immediately we have B B-15, Hunter B-15, wanting to grab and take Loki to go with her, and Mobius is going to go with the TVA. And Mobius is like, well, no, like, I want to work with Loki. I think that I should be able to work with Loki because that's the whole reason why I brought him here. And B-15 is like, well, that's great and all, but no, like, if anything, I'm not really trusting you with him. And Loki is like, well, hey, like, I get it. Like, if anything, I'm not trustworthy to you people, so I'm going to be able to earn your trust. And Mobius is like, you know what, every single time someone is to ask you to trust them, that's when, like, you just naturally assume to not trust them. Because Mobius was to mention to Loki the countless times in his life that Loki has literally stabbed people in the back. And Loki is like, well, hey, like, I'm not going to stab you guys in the back because, like, you know what, I'm tired of that. I'm bored of that. I've done that numerous times now. And so I will never do that again. So we're at this convenience store, and so Loki, who had used his magic to be able to dry all of his clothes and his everything off, I guess, so that way they can keep him like looking continuous compared to everyone else that could look any number of different ways because they're not on camera for enough time. Plus, Loki's the star, so you might as well make him like not get sick or pneumonia or whatever. So they could play this a number of ways. So Loki go as if this is literally a winter storm or whatever that Loki had been tied into. No, CGI, and then him coming in and him looking dry. Yeah, anyways. So, Loki, bizarrely in this episode, has a bunch of powers. And I'm like, why is it that Loki never used any of these powers before and is just using them now? Because writing? It's just to show that, like, well, we need to have Loki have these powers now. So, write it in. Just write it in that Loki has a number of powers that he's never used. Because Mobius also goes into showcasing to everyone that there have been a wide variety of different Lokis, and they kind of show different variations of it, and Loki is like, well, yeah, like, if anything, like, I'm sure there'll be a number of different variations of me that exist, and so on and so forth. So, foreshadowing something. So, Loki is to go through this convenience store with B-15, and they are to immediately stop someone who is bizarrely shopping for some kind of product, and immediately we have people like stopping this guy and like, dude, why are you shopping in this store? Like, you do realize the world is ending, right? And this guy is like, well, like, there's a storm sale out. Like, I'm trying to get the best prices. And it's like, dude, there's absolutely nobody in this store but you. This is a convenience store that doesn't have any registers in the front of the opening of this store or a door location. This store has no registers. All it has is just like aisles, and it's to make it look like a convenience store. But the longer we go into this convenience store, we realize how, like, really, like, this does not actually look like a convenience store. This convenience store has a lot of small aisles to make it look like a convenience store, but it's not. Like, I've worked at several convenience stores, and if this is the future convenience store, then it's not going to be at all convenient to go into this store to find anything, because there is very small aisles in this convenience store. Like, there's huge gaps, like gigantic gaps between one section to the other. I'm like, God, this convenience store is way too open. How is it that this convenience store even makes any money? And plus, also, how could they make money? Because there is absolutely no registers present, or there's no way to understand how people are to make money in this convenience store, because justifiably, like, unless you are to, like, have your items and then walk through the door and they, like, ring that up for you as you go out the door, or there is no need for money in 2050. Yeah, so this guy is to be stopped, and so this shopper is to touch B-15 so that way she turns into Loki, to have this dialogue between her and Loki. So it's funny how Loki is thinking that this other Loki is a weaker Loki, or just dumber Loki, or whatever, and the other Loki is to feel the exact same way towards him. So this Loki keeps hopping from person to person to person, eventually hopping to a guy named Randy, to eventually not want Loki to call him Loki, to call him Randy instead. And so Loki eventually is to realize that Randy is to place a bomb in this location to kill off the TVA that are to make their way to this location, because Loki has a contingency plan. So the TVA are to realize that there is eventually going to be a bomb going off. Mobius is to locate the other hunter from the Renaissance Fair that is to be here, and so they are to have a dialogue together, like this hunter and Mobius, like trying to figure out like what had like been going on. So, like, for the time that they missed. So Loki is talking to Randy, and like, and trying to have us understand that this evil Loki thinks that this Loki is a less than Loki. So Eventually, Randy changes into yet a bigger, guy that is to start just kicking and beating up Loki. And Loki immediately says, it's like, well, you know what? I miss Randy. So Loki is getting beaten up by this other Loki, but it is kind of flimsy. He just gets kicked twice, and there's kind of like some like choking scenario that is going on. So Loki is to see like the time clicking away on this bomb. So we have the TVA that is running to eventually try to get to this Loki, and we have the TVA at the office that is to see, oh my god, we are going to get a 000 bomb event that is going to ripple the time continuum. Like, we need to handle this whole bomb scenario. We need to eliminate this threat, or it's going to destroy the time, the central timeline thing. So we're here to have Loki and the TVA try and take down this bomb, and before this bomb is to go off, we have Loki go into a orange like door, like a quantum leap like door, that is to showcase that Loki is actually a female Loki. And I'm like, yeah, that is not a surprise to me. I knew that there was probably going to be an Agatha all along moment where we were going to assume that the Loki that we were going to get would be Tom. And no, I already knew, like, once we finally got female Loki, I'm like, oh, of course that's where we go. Of course that's what we do. Because we need to have a villain that doesn't look like Tom, because this show is cheap. Plus, also, they need to give us a variation of Loki that they can merchandise and sell, and it has to be a female Loki, so that way they don't have to double up on merchandising. Plus, also, they had this story right here to show everyone, so why not show this here? Why not actually have a villain that we don't have to CGI in every single time, if we're going to have Tom against Tom? So really, a lot of people could say, hey man, like, isn't it like great though that like we have this? Because if anything, like, the pilot episode made this sound lame, but once we get here, like, this is something that a lot of people can be excited about, especially the female audience, because they're like, oh my god, now I can cosplay as Loki. Oh my god, and it's justified. And I can be female Loki. Woohoo! And a lot of women may be excited about that, because a lot of women might have cosplayed as Loki at some point or another, but then realize now, like, oh wait, like, now I can actually cosplay as female Loki, and it's now justified. Plus, a lot of people who are comic book nerds probably did know about female Loki anyways, so a lot of people might actually be excited. Especially the female gender, which, high five, freaking females, because yeah, you get female Loki. So female Loki goes into this time portal, and Loki goes after her, and Mobius and the TVA are trying to run to get into that door as well before it closes, but sadly it closes, and Loki and female Loki are to go through this door, and the episode is to just end there. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here because I spent too much time talking about this. Bye everybody. Bye everybody.